when you're faced with a challenge or an opportunity, most CEO, founder, leaders think about, as you alluded to, what should we do and how should we do it? And that's brilliant and that's important. What you're missing is the who questions. Who do we need? There are no new problems. There are no new challenges. The only new problems are the ones you haven't seen. So somebody else has seen, solved the challenges, the pitfalls, either in or you're headed for. So we don't ask, Gene, I don't believe we ask enough who questions. Who do we need? Then who do we know? And then how do we connect the dots between the relationships we already have and the relationships we need to accelerate our ability to get there? You throw enough time, effort, resources, you'll eventually get there. One of the incredible value of relationships is that it can accelerate your time to cash, accelerate your time to results, accelerate your time to the outcomes you're after if you start asking better who questions.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? Every leader knows the power of relationships. Now, sometimes they pay more attention to strategies or KPIs or all the other things inside of our business, but great CEOs know how to build strong relationships. And that's the core of today's conversation. Our special guest is coach, consultant. David's written 11 books, one of them Relationship Economics. And today we're going to talk about how CEOs build strong relationships. The reason why I think you want to listen to this is because we go through some of the things that get in the way of us building strong relationships internal to our company and external. We also look at how we must show up as leaders consistently and how we connect with others and how we have difficult conversations when the time comes. All that packed inside this episode. And if you want to be an extraordinary leader, if you really want to take your leadership to that next level, I want to invite you to a conversation. Inside that conversation, we're going to look at not only what you want to create, but also what gets in the way. I have this conversation probably 2 or 3 times a week. And so if you're sitting back thinking, you know what, I'll do that later, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and do it now. Because if you have some interest to be an extraordinary leader, if you really want to lead powerfully and inspire your people in a different way than you are today, you want different results, then let's have a conversation. There's no pressure sales. There's actually no sales at all inside this first conversation. It is a chance for me to serve, get to know you, and see if there's a reason why we continue this forward. Sometimes those relationships don't, but many times they do. So if you want to take me up on that, just go to genehammett.com and schedule your call today. We'll talk, we'll chat. You'll walk away with more clarity than ever before. Just go to genehammett.com and schedule your call. Now here's the interview with David. David, how are you?
I'm great, Gene. Nice to see you.
Excited to have you on the podcast. I will refer to you as Nour because that's what your friends call you. And we're going to get really friendly in today's conversation. Give us a little bit of an overview of who you are and what's allowed you to be the person that you are today.
So thanks for having me. Let's see. Originally from Iran, came to the US in 1981, Gene, with a suitcase, $100, didn't know anybody and didn't speak a word of English. The reason I tell that story is because I'm a product of really 2 distinct cultures. For your audience members who've lived or worked abroad, they realize this next statement: the rest of the world builds relationships first from which they do business. As Americans, we're so focused on the business part that if and only if the business part works, we may ask other people about their personal lives. So I've taken that nature, that natural DNA, and I've combined it with business acumen. And this is year 20 of my business, focused on large enterprise accounts, but also growth-oriented companies, and specifically their strategic relationships.
Well, we've got a lot of growth-oriented companies listening in here, typically founders, CEOs. There may be a few people outside of that, but I want you to really give us an idea of what gets in the way of founders and CEOs creating the kind of relationship they need to accelerate their company growth.
I would submit it's their myths and misperceptions about relationships. So let me give you 3 quick ones. One, the perception about relationships: I already know everything I need to know about it. And that's the kiss of death, because if you're not learning, growing, you're not evolving. Number 2, you intellectually understand that relationships are important. Very few become very strategic and intentional, and as such quantifiable about the relationships. Number 3, you don't really think about relationships as an investment. You wouldn't make a blind investment in a stock or equity in another company, but most people make blind investments in their relationships. Hence, they don't really think about a return on those relationship investments.
Pretty good. succinct way of looking at it. I know the problem that I see with a lot of founders and CEOs is they get so focused on the work that they forget that there's a person behind this, and they forget to do different things. And I actually kind of in my work say, are you managing the work? Or are you leading the person in this conversation? When I talk about that with you, what would you add to that as far as CEOs concerned?
I'm gonna build on it, because same CEOs, if I don't care if you're running a $5 or a $50 million company, when you're faced with a challenge or an opportunity, most CEO founder leaders think about, as you alluded to, what should we do and how should we do it? And that's brilliant and that's important. What you're missing is the who questions. Who do we need? There are no new problems. There are no new challenges. The only new problems are the ones you haven't seen. So somebody else has seen, solved the challenges, the pitfalls, either in or you're headed for. So we don't ask, Gene, I don't believe we ask enough who questions. Who do we need? Then who do we know? And then how do we connect the dots between the relationships we already have and the relationships we need to accelerate our ability to get there? You throw enough time, effort, resources, you'll eventually get there. One of the incredible value of relationships is that it can accelerate your time to cash, accelerate your time to results, accelerate your time to the outcomes you're after if you start asking better who questions.
I interpret this as, if we've got a challenge inside the company, instead of trying to figure out how do we solve it, your explanation here is, who is it that we can partner with, or who is it that we can hire, or who is it that knows more about this than we do? I think there's another side to it I would love for you to share with us, is the who inside the organization. So instead of being external, it's more internal focused. What would you add there?
No question. And one of the myths and misperceptions about relationships that is purely external, right? Customers, suppliers, investors, partners, distribution partners, whatever, outside the organization. I would submit, just like a family, if it's dysfunctional on the inside, everybody sees it. So believe it or not, a lot of my work, a lot of my focus, a lot of my coaching is focused on, look who your people, your team is cheering for. Look who they're not cheering for. Look who is excelling at a really interesting pace, and then who's not. And what's really the difference between those two? Is it skills? Is it knowledge? Is it attitude? Is it behaviors? Again, a lot of who question. Who else has dealt with this scenario? Who else has got a jerk for a superstar sales rep? And how are they dealing with that scenario? So if you peel back relationship challenges, you'll eventually figure out somebody else, like I said, has seen this. Somebody else has dealt with it. Somebody else knows how to work the way around this challenge or an opportunity. Who are there? Who's the struggle? Who's the root cause of the struggle? Who else has seen this? Who else do we know? How else do we either help get this person some help, or really look for alternative paths for them and for us?
I want to ask you about something you said in there. You were talking about cheering for and not cheering for. That really signaled to me, if someone's cheering for them, that person might be a good candidate for leadership skills and be able to lead a team. Whereas vice versa, they're not cheering for that person. You might want to stay away from it, because it might be a little bit harder battle to create that cohesion behind a team. Did I interpret that right?
You're exactly right. So if you think about a fundamental difference between an individual contributor and a leader, is you have to elevate the role from your own contribution, your own doing, to that of influence, that of often influence without authority, right? So I might need you not just to direct people that may work for me, but we also need to work with other functions or other groups or people outside the organization. So if people in your organization are cheering for Sam, if they're cheering for Beth, A, figure out why. B, and it's typically going to be some of their behavior. And you probably have seen the same, what I've increasingly seen in really that next generation of leaders is they build a preference for their technical capability, right? They know the business, they know how to sell, they know how to market, they know how to build products and ship, run a warehouse. That's their technical capability. Gene, they build a preference for the way they build and nurture relationships. So when people say, I want to work for Sam, or I'd love to work with Beth on that project, they're not really referencing their technical capability. They're referencing the way that person builds consensus or gets buy-in or behaves like a servant leader. Those attributes is exactly right. Makes them phenomenal leaders and really an opportunity for them to run a critical piece of the business.
Now, hold on for a second. David just talked about, recognizing people who have influence across the organization. I know I've said this before, maybe framed in questions, but I want to make sure we put a spotlight on this one thing. If you want to identify future leaders in your company, look to those who already have influence, people that respect, people that really do want to work with others. They're cheering them on. When you identify those people, you want to make sure that you invest in them, because those are the most likely leaders in your company moving forward. They may not have the skill sets you're looking for to be the star salesperson or the star coder. and that's okay. But you want to make sure that you are tuning in to who has influence across the organization and really assess, is that person capable of learning the skills to be a leader across this team and across many teams. They don't have to be experts in that. Of course, you probably already know that, but it does help when they are working with small teams for the first times to understand how the team works and the processes inside of it, but they don't have to be the rock star. And in fact, sometimes the rock star is what gets in the way of them being great leaders. Just my 2 cents here. Back to David. Our whole conversation has been centered around, leaders creating relationships. I think a lot of leaders will have this kind of blind spot inside this, or maybe it's a predetermined identity that they're not good at with people. They're better with numbers. They're better with technologies. They're better with process. They're better with something else other than people. How do you respond to leaders that have that kind of standpoint?
Yeah, I would give more leaders probably more of a benefit of the doubt, because most leaders, most organizations, certainly most hyper growth organizations, you seldom have gotten there by yourself, right? You've been able to attract people that have contributed to your growth, and you continue to do so. So why did they come work for your company? It can't just be a product or service. They typically like some attribute about you as a leader. And increasingly, we're seeing more and more individuals, talented individuals, go to companies, not just a product or service, but I'm going there to work with so-and-so. You and I also hear a great deal recently in the news about the Great Resignation. Newsflash, they're not quitting a job. They're quitting a leader, or they're quitting a company where the leadership has misaligned values with them. So A, give yourself more credit. B, really get to peel back the onion, really understand the people who are there, people who are thriving. Why did they join? Why have they stayed? And how do we replicate that model to attract, develop, elevate others in the organization?
Great points. We're talking about the great CEOs develop strong relationships. And I don't know of any CEOs that haven't come to me with people problems. In fact, most of the time we talk about, it comes down to people problems. And it's something that's gotten off track. Maybe it's expectations that weren't set. Maybe it's tensions about something, or maybe you've got to deal with a very difficult, someone said something they shouldn't have said. But I really believe that relationships are a way to invest in the goodwill, so that when you do have difficult feedback, it's much easier because the relationship is built on the foundation, not just out of the blue. When you are talking with your clients around building relationships for the people problems, what are the key insights you can share with us?
Yeah. So to build on your comment, maybe different terminology or different context, but I talk a lot about, and I've written about this idea of relationship currency. And the notion is it's a lot easier for you to ask for something, right? To have your hand out if you start by giving a hand. And again, starting with the inside the organization, I struggle in seeing how any perk, any benefit really works as one size fits all. So regardless of the size of the organization, the more owners, founders, leaders can lead by walking around and really on a one-on-one basis, get to know the individuals, what makes them tick, what really, and Gene, you would appreciate this comment. I've always believed it's very difficult to light a fire under people. I coach leaders to find ways to light a fire within people. Because lighting a fire under people just doesn't last. So if you understand what motivates that individual, you can cater to that which is going to make them tick, and it's going to really help elevate their thinking, perspective, impact, results. So if you make that investment, again, it's a relationship currency investment in that individual, it's going to be a lot easier for you to ask for a return on that investment over some period of time. The other thing I'm a big believer of, just on the same lines, is, again, just like our education, those relationship investments is something people cannot take away, right? It's you betting on, you doubling down on key individuals that are future of the business. And you have to be willing to let go as that founder, as that leader. They may not do it your way, but as long as the outcomes are crystal clear, and we're talking about within legal and ethical bounds, let them get creative on how they get there, because they might just surprise you. But that's part of the autonomy increasingly more and more people are looking for.
Now, David's been talking about relationship currency. I want to make sure that you understand where we are on this. When you are developing a relationship currency with other individuals, you're basically creating goodwill. You're creating a space for trust to be built on. And then when the time comes for a difficult conversation, for something that will give them feedback, help them meet your expectations, help the company grow, maybe you call upon them to do something outside of the norm. If you have paid into that as goodwill, that relationship, you have a much better chance to connect with that person and to get them to shift in the way that you need them to shift. If it's feedback feedback. They're going to receive that feedback a little bit less personal because you have a personal relationship with them before you actually have that difficult conversation, just as one example. I want to make sure that you understood how important relationship currency is and how it's used and leveraged as your company continues to grow. Back to David. I want to wrap up. Well, we're not quite close to wrapping up, but I want to kind of dive into a little bit different area. We all have to give difficult conversations as leaders. I have a small company that's probably 6 people. Many of the people listening in here might have 20 or 50 or 100 people, but difficult conversations are something we have to do over and over again. What are your strategies for getting a leader prepared for those difficult conversations?
Sure. So I've long believed, and someone asked me once my leadership style, I've always believed hard on performance, soft on people. If you think about it a second, I've always believed relationships go bad with misaligned expectations. You're expected to do this level of performance. You deliver the lower level, which is fine, but the gap is where we have a problem. So I coach people to get crystal clear on the expectation. And if we're both in agreement on what's expected of you, when they happen, great. I'm going to become your biggest cheerleader. And by the way, servant leadership can't just be a mantra. I actually work for everybody else that I work with. And my question of them is always, what do you need? What can I provide? What can I go get? How do I remove obstacles out of your way for you to do that which I'm asking you to do, which is the performance? If it doesn't happen, then I want to know why it didn't happen. Is it a process shortcoming? Is it a skill? Is it a knowledge? Is it a give me the willingness and I can always raise the bar on their ability. But if the willingness is not there, neither me, you, or anybody else is going to be able to do anything about it. So get clear expectations and buy in on the expectations, be much more empathetic, much more of a servant leader, be much more understanding of why something is not happening. And then you create a plan on how do we get there? How do we get to the results we're after? And if the person is willing, if the intent is there, if the goodwill is there, they'll eventually get there. If they're the wrong person, I'd rather tell them that now and let's find something else for them inside or outside the organization. But let's not just keep the same person in the same role failing month after month, quarter after quarter, when neither side is really going to be happy with that result.
I love the way you frame that in. So I appreciate that, Nour. I want to take this a little bit deeper into this because this is what we do here. Let's say you've been crystal clear with the expectations. You've had the conversations 2 or 3 times, and I'll go ahead and add in. Most leaders think it takes 1 conversations to get a change of behavior. And I remind them that it typically takes many, many more than 1. Just look at their relationship with their significant other and all the time it takes for them to shape you into the person that you are today. But when you recognize patterns with people, for example, tardiness or not hitting their sales numbers or not being present in certain meetings, there is some examples, those patterns. What do you advise leaders about having those conversations?
Sure. Again, I'm asking enough questions to satisfy, do I fully understand not just what's happening, but why is it happening? So if we just take tardiness, is it that they don't have reliable transportation, or is it they're hitting the snooze button too many times, right? So those are, I'm going to intervene very differently with those 2 different scenarios. So again, I'm asking enough questions. I'm looking for observable behavior, not hearsay, observable behaviors to really understand why something is happening. If it is kind of consistent, somebody is consistently late, somebody consistently interrupts, somebody consistently is rude, then I'm going to invest in, again, I'd rather deal with the devil I know versus devil I don't. If the person is worth fighting for, if that talent is worth keeping in the organization, I'm going to double down on training, on coaching, on develop, on finding an opportunity to interrupt that behavior pattern. At some point, people have gotten beyond the skill or the knowledge. It's really changes in behavior. And that's never a switch. It's always a dial. What do we need to dial up? What do we need to dial back? So I'm going to intervene. I'm going to try to disrupt that bad behavior. At some point, Gene, you've been around this. You've coached a lot of leaders in this arena as well. That individual chooses not to be with our organization. And I can't take credit for this. I heard somebody else say it, but they said more people should boogie. When I asked, what does that mean? Be outstanding or get involved elsewhere.
I don't know who said that either, but I like it. Nour, we've been talking about great CEOs develop strong relationships. Is there anything I left out that you want to highlight before we wrap today?
Yeah, I think the same great relationships can serve, we call them signal scouts. So if you build relationships far and wide in your industry, outside of your industry, the really intelligent ones, the really astute ones should start to identify faint market signals. You start to bring those in, and we've proven they can also become a fountain of innovative products, services, experiences for your business. So they can also serve not just your strategy, not just your growth, but real innovation in your products, in your services, in your experiences, in how you go to market.
Nour, thank you for being here, sharing your insights. I know you spent many years working with high-level executives, coaching, consulting. Your wisdom is appreciated.
Gene, thanks for having me.
Wow, what a powerful interview. David's really specific about the things that are getting in the way of the relationships you want. Great CEOs know how to build strong relationships, and that is so true. When you think about your own journey as a leader, you want to make sure that you're building the relationships that are necessary, putting in investments into the goodwill of each person on your team, so that when you have difficult conversations, when you have things that you need to share back with them, maybe you need to coach them up, maybe you need to coach them out, you're ready because you have a foundation to build on. Great relationships really do matter inside of leadership. Now, I've offered this to you before, but if you're listening into this and you really want to take your business and your leadership to that next level, all you have to do is go to genehammett.com and click on schedule your call. Inside that, you will be asked a few questions just for us to get to know you, and you'll have a conversation with me about what is really going to create the catalyst and the impact to accelerate your company and accelerate your own leadership. Just go to genehammett.com and schedule your call. As always, when you think of growth and you think of leadership, I want you to think of Growth Think Tank. Lead with courage. We'll see you next time.